morning, everybody. My name's Curt Baranowski. I am with EPA's Office of Water, and I'm going to be presenting to all of you today on our Creating Resilient Water Utilities initiative, along with my colleague, Audrey Ramming. And I really want to keep this informal. If you have questions along the way, there certainly will be time to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but if you want to raise your hand, and hopefully I'll be able to see it, and happy to answer questions along the way. But I really appreciate your time this morning, and I just kind of wanted to get a feel for the room, just to see who's in here. How many of you are associated with actual utility, drinking water or wastewater utility? And are there consultants? I see this. I don't know what that means, but you can tell me later. Are there any consultants in the room? Government agencies? Okay. And then other, I'm probably missing people, but okay. So it seems like many utilities, which is great because this is what this is geared towards. I can't see the slide, so I just want to make sure that they're moving forward. Did that work? Really afraid to get too close to this edge. Thank you. So I just wanted to provide you a little bit of background on what we do under Creating Resilient Water Utilities Initiative, which I'll refer to as CRWU. What we're doing is we're taking a look at all the existing climate science data that's out there, and we're putting it into usable formats for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities of all sizes to contemplate what their futures are going to look like and then adapt to those futures. So we have a number of tools and resources that we'll talk to you about on how to actually walk through a climate change risk assessment to better understand what your potential future is going to look like and then how to plan. This initiative has been in place for about 15 years, and we've built it out slowly but surely with all sorts of partners. So drinking water and wastewater utilities of all sizes, other federal agencies, climate science experts, water sector associations. So I think we've really kind of done a good job of meeting the needs of the water sector as it relates to climate change risk assessment. The other thing that I'd like to mention about the initiative is all of the work that we do is voluntary. So this doesn't have a regulatory driver. We're a very small initiative. We're a group of 5 people with 1 fellow. We rely heavily on contractors to help us supplement our work. But we do quite a bit for the small group that we're with, or that we are. So, and that's one of the things that I want to talk about. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Does that work? So next slide. It's probably me and not the technology, so I always kind of have difficulty with this. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the technical assistance that we provide to water utilities. So, like I said, we're a small group. We rely on contractors. But what we do is we provide direct technical assistance to water utilities to walk through a climate change risk assessment. So we'll bring in climate science experts, we will bring in engineers, we bring in facilitators that know how to use our tools and resources, and work one-on-one with utilities, or sometimes in a group where we'll do a regional assessment, maybe 2 or 3 utilities that have similar climate concerns in the same geographic area. And that's a great way to share a peer-to-peer information across the utility family. But what we do is we bring in this team. Typically we'll do 2 or 3, maybe sometimes 4 virtual meetings where we work with you directly. It could be just your operator. It could be if you have communications people or an engineer, depending on the size of the utility, realizing that many tribal utilities are probably on the smaller side and it may be just one or two people working at the utility. So you don't have that kind of expertise, but we can bring it in to help you think through what your climate future is going to look like and then how to adapt to it. So we have a number of tools and resources. I'm not going to get into that because Audrey's going to cover that, but the main tool that we typically use is our climate resilience evaluation and awareness tool, which is called CREATE. It's a full-on climate change risk assessment tool. We also use our resilience strategies guide, which is a nice introductory climate change information tool for smaller utilities especially. So a lot of good information. And then we have a tremendous amount of data mapped out on historical weather as well as climate projections that, again, Audrey will get into. The other thing that we do are workshops. So in particular, last year we did, I believe, 4 or 5 workshops, and all of them were working with tribes, which was really exciting. So we did something on a national level with the Indian Health Service. We did work with tribes in Oklahoma and New Mexico. And I offer this as opportunity here today for all of you, whether or not you're interested in maybe participating in a workshop, maybe you're interested in actually developing one with us or going one-on-one with our technical assistants. My contact information, Audrey's contact information is at the end of this presentation. So if you're interested in any of that, please reach out to us or just catch us after the presentation. We'll be around all day to talk more about that. But we do have an opportunity right now because we're planning out for what is our fiscal year 24, which started on October 1, for potentially one more workshop. So if you're thinking that there's a group of utilities potentially in this area or across the EPA's Region 9 or this geographic area that might be interested in that, please come and talk to us. More so to Audrey because she's really the one that runs those, but we'll be happy to talk to you a lot more about those in the future and maybe plan something out with you over the next year. So if we could move on to the next slide. I wanted to hit up here just a little bit because I talked about some of the technical assistance and workshops that we've provided over the past, over the past year especially, but over the past about 5 years, we've really been focusing in on technical assistance. These are a number of tribes that we've worked with over the past 5 years. To the right-hand side, the map that you see, and we'll get into this a little bit more, it's just plotted out where those utilities exist. But we do have a case studies map where you can actually go in and see what the utility did and see a point of contact there. But in particular, with Pueblo of Laguna in New Mexico, they were a fantastic partner for us, and we've done quite a bit of work with them over the past year, and I think we're going to continue to do so. And Audrey's going to talk a bit more about them in detail, but a really, really great partner. And I think a lot to learn from them as you consider climate impact at your utility. I'm actually curious too, for the utility folks in the room, again, just by show of hands, have any of you on any level done a climate change risk assessment or considered it in any of your planning, or are you thinking about it on any level? Okay, good. That's more than I typically see when we get to speak to folks, when we have the opportunity to speak to folks. So that's great. I'm really glad to see the proactiveness there. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So I've talked a lot about our technical assistance and our workshops, but one of the things as a result of COVID, and I don't ever think that good things came from COVID, but what we did have the opportunity to do was to do quite a bit of virtual training over those 2 years where we were in unfortunate lockdown. So we were able to provide our workshop trainings virtually and capture them on GoToWebinar. So we've edited those down and we've put them up on EPA's website. So this is a really great resource if you just kind of want to start to take a look at what we do and how we do it from a workshop perspective. And typically what we do is in a workshop, it will be, if we do it in person, which is basically what we're doing now, it's one full day, 8 hours, where we come into a particular region. We'll have maybe 20 to 40 utilities in a room or water sector partners, and we'll give sort of an idea of what current problems are, current climate concerns are, and then what the future is going to look like. Then we introduce EPA's tools and resources. And then what we do is, because, it's one thing to hear from us about kind of in general what we do, but it's really important to hear from utilities that have actually walked through this process. And we present up a case study, so the utility comes in along with us to talk about their experience and what they learned. And again, just like with Pueblo, Laguna, or all those other utilities on the previous slide, they've all worked with us and spoke on our behalf. And then the last part of the training, of course, is because this is probably the most important and a huge driver for all of you, is funding. You can have all the information in the world about how to adapt to climate future and know how to do it, but if you don't have the funds to do it, that's incredibly problematic. So we've been incorporating, especially over the past year, funders into our workshops as well as our technical assistance processes. So folks from the SRFs, from WIFIA, EPA's WIFIA program, folks from FEMA, sometimes USDA. So a lot of good resources so that they can understand what your climate concerns are, how you're going to adapt, and help utilities kind of move forward in thinking how to fund those adaptive measures. So, and we'll continue to improve upon that, but I think we make some really good connections for folks. So then I just want to kind of move on to the last slide, if we could just flip to the next slide and talk a little bit more about financing. So I think it was, I think it was 2 years ago, a year ago, the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed by the Biden administration. There's $50 billion with a B dollars associated with the water sector for infrastructure improvements and all sorts of work. A lot of that is going towards lead replacement lines, but there's a good portion of it, about 20 billion, that's for operations and maintenance, climate assessment, capital investment improvements. And so there is a lot of money out there, and it is being processed through EPA, typically down to the states through the state revolving funds, whether that's clean water or drinking water. But and there's a lot of set-asides for tribal organizations and utilities too. So we are doing our best to make those connects into there. And just recently, there was a grant announced for $19 million that is for smaller utilities, which would include tribes, to get grants to do climate assessment and improvements. So we have a site or a page up on our CRWU website that gives a nice rundown of financing and what's available. So I would encourage you to go to our website. Again, our website is, I think, very easy to understand. It's only a few pages, and we'll provide you with the link at the end of this presentation, and we can share, of course, this presentation with you. So with that, I'm going to stop and hand it over to my colleague, Audrey. And then, of course, if there are questions at the end, we'll answer them for you. So just give Audrey a second to get up here. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Audrey Ramming. I'll be taking you through the rest of our presentation. So I'm going to walk you through some of the tools that we use during our technical assistance process. They're also the tools that we train systems and technical assistance providers how to use during our trainings and workshops that Curt was mentioning. But I'm going to put them in the context of a technical assistance exercise that we did with the Pueblo of Laguna tribe in New Mexico. So we actually had the chance to work with them this past spring, and we've got their blessing. So I'm going to sort of use their exercise as a case study so you can get a better sense of our program and our tools and the types of challenges that some tribal systems are facing. So first, a little bit of background on the Pueblo of Laguna. They are a federally recognized tribe near Albuquerque, New Mexico. Their reservation spans approximately 500,000 acres of desert, and they have 6 villages within their reservation. So they were established, or the utility authority was established in 1998, and it's wholly owned by the Pueblo. They provide drinking water, wastewater, and solid waste services to their customers. They don't charge for drinking water, but they do charge for wastewater, and they service about 5,000 tribal members within their reservation. So if you could move on to the next slide. So the Laguna Pueblo, they operate 3 drinking water systems. They focused on their drinking water side of their utility for their climate risk assessment that they did with us. Their source water comes from groundwater springs in the Mount Taylor watershed and from wells in the shallow alluvial aquifers in the Rio San Jose Basin. The groundwater is considered to be under the influence of surface water, and because they don't get much rain in their area, they rely heavily on snowmelt from snowpack to recharge their drinking water. So they have 6 wells, 2 filtration systems, 109 miles of pipeline, 9 storage tanks, and they have both SCADA and manual operating systems. So if you can move on to the next slide. So because the Pueblo of Laguna is concerned with water availability in for the future, they wanted to do a technical assistance exercise with us. And the way that that works is that we use 3 different tools to walk them through the technical assistance process. And they are the climate data maps, the resilient strategies guide, and a tool that we call CREATE, so the climate resilience evaluation and awareness tool. All 3 of these tools are free. They are on our website, and anyone can go and use them at any time. But we're here to help and walk you through these tools if you need assistance. So you can move on to the next slide. So the first tool I want to talk about is our suite of interactive climate data maps. So we sort of start with this tool as a teaching tool so that utilities can get a better sense of their not only what their historical climate has been, but also what their climate is projected to do in the future. So of the 5 maps that are listed up there, the Pueblo of Laguna used the climate projections map. And this map shows the basics. It shows the projected changes in temperature, precipitation, sea level rise, storms, extreme heat, and it's projected out through 2035 and 2060, although we are currently updating this to be 2050 and 2090, so that data should be updated soon. They also use the snowpack map that we have. It shows both historical and projected changes in snowpack for watersheds in the western United States. And this is really built out to help water utilities understand how the changing timing of snowpack and spring snowmelt can affect their water recharge to their drinking water supply. But then we also have 3 other maps that utilities can explore if it's applicable to them in their area. So we have a stream flow projections map, which shows both historical and projected changes in stream flow across the U.S. And it also shows the current status of stream gauges and reservoirs. And then we also have a storm surge, inundation, and hurricane strike frequency map. As you might guess, this is a little more useful for utilities on the East Coast, but it shows areas of coastal flooding and flooding inundation heights from coastal storm surge. And it also provides hurricane advisories in real time. Then we have a wildfire map, which shows current wildfires that are happening across the US, and that's actually overlaid with real-time drought data. And it also shows historical wildfire trends, I think from around 1980 through 2019. So we could go on to the next slide. So the Pueblo Laguna, their main climate concern was drought. So we focused on this for their climate risk assessment. But using the data maps, we found that climate models are projecting temperatures to increase up to 3 degrees Fahrenheit by 2035. And they're projecting precipitation trends to likely become more variable. And it shows a 5 to 9% decrease in annual precipitation by 2035. We also found that the snowpack in the Rio Grande is projected to decrease over time to about 60% of its baseline, and that snow melt is projected to occur about 20 days earlier by the end of the century. So this combination is likely going to lead to more frequent and intense drought, more extreme wildfire, more extreme heat, and decreased snowpack, which of course leads to decreased flows in their snow-fed rivers and less groundwater recharge, which is how they recharge their aquifer. So the Pueblo Laguna is concerned that these climate-related challenges will potentially threaten its ability to meet water demand in the future. So now that we have this kind of understanding of what their climate future is going to look like, we moved on to the actual risk assessment process. And so we had 2 tools to do that, and the Pueblo of Laguna used both of these tools in their technical assistance process. So the first one I want to talk about is the Resilient Strategies Guide. So if you can move on to the next slide. So the Resilient Strategies Guide is, it's a free online decision-making tool. It's sort of our foundational beginner tool that is meant for users in the earlier stages of understanding climate impact to their utilities. It's a good starting point, especially for smaller utilities, to get a better sense of their adaptation options after they've begun to consider their climate future after looking at those climate data maps. So it's a really simple tool, but the cool part is that it's basically a library of adaptation strategies that utilities across the country have used in the past to address climate impact at their systems. So the way it works is that it walks users through a series of steps that build upon one another. And then by the end, the utility will have generated a list of potential adaptation strategies that they can use at their system to address climate concerns and protect their assets. So I don't know if you can see it that well, but there's 5 steps. The first one is getting started, and you basically input your utility's location, the population size that's served, and what type of drinking water, wastewater, or stormwater system that you are. And then you move on to priorities, where you kind of look through and choose your biggest concerns facing your utility. So it could be, reduced snowpack or groundwater recharge. And then you move on to assets, and you pick which vulnerable assets that you have at your utility, and then you move on to strategies, where it's that list of potential strategies that you can take. And then by the end, based on the selections you've made throughout the guide, it will provide a list of potential funding options for you. So it's both from the states and from federal funding sources, and it's got contact information and a little bit of information on how to apply to those funding sources. And then the last step of the RSG, and if you could hit the next button, there's a little animation. But at the end, you get a full report that sort of outlines everything you've chosen as you walk through the guide. And you can use this, to help with your decision making. But also what's cool about the RSG is that this report can be uploaded into our next tool, Create. And so that's what the Pueblo of Laguna did. They walked through this tool, they got their list of potential adaptation strategies, and they wanted to further evaluate them in Create. So if you could go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about Create. All right, so there's going to be a lot of animations in this slide. Okay, so Create is a much more robust, much more in-depth advanced tool than the Resilient Strategies Guide. It's also a decision-making tool, so it's not a climate model, but it's designed to help utilities assess the economic risk from climate change. So it guides users through 5 modules. So if you could animate the first one. The first is climate awareness. And this module is where you identify what your biggest climate threats are. So Pueblo of Laguna, for example, identified drought as its main climate threat. And then if you could animate again, we've got our scenario development module, where you design future climate scenarios to better understand the risk to your utility. So in this module, Create actually pulls climate data from the National Climate Assessment. And you can review all the, the monthly precipitation and temperature data. You can choose the grid cell and the stream gauge that's closest to your assets. And you also have the option to override this National Climate Assessment data and Create if, potentially you have your own kind of climate data that's maybe more downscaled, or maybe you have another source for historical stream flow data that you want to input instead. So this tool is really customizable, which is really cool. But then in developing their climate scenarios, the Pueblo of Laguna, they wanted to evaluate a future with hotter and drier conditions by the year 2035. And so they built out that scenario, but then they also analyzed that projected future against a baseline scenario, which is essentially the average of the climate over the past 30 years. And then if you could animate, got the third module, which is consequences and assets, where you identify your vulnerable assets. So it could be like a treatment plant or a water tower. The Pueblo of Laguna chose to identify their aquifer as their asset of most concern. That's most vulnerable to the drought threat that they identified in that first module. And then the fourth module, if you could animate again, is adaptation planning, where you identify your potential adaptation strategies that might be useful to implement at your utility in the future in order to reduce your risk to that climate threat. So the Pueblo of Laguna identified 5 potential adaptation strategies. They're listed up there, and they can help mitigate their risk to drought. So they chose develop alternate water sources, implement a water reuse program, implement a drought management plan, and then water loss and water use audits as potential strategies that they might want to pursue in the future. And then if you can animate again, the last module is risk assessment. This is where you compare the risk reduction and the economic benefit of implementing your chosen adaptation plan versus not doing anything to adapt. So just continuing business as usual. And there might not actually be an economic benefit of adapting. But because Create actually monetizes your results, you can see in dollars the economic risk that you might mitigate by adapting your infrastructure and operations to become more resilient to climate change. So if you could animate one more time, what does that look like? Well, this is a snapshot of Pueblo of Laguna's risk results. And so, for instance, they lumped the develop alternate water sources strategy and the water reuse program strategy into one capital improvement plan. And it cost roughly $3.8 million. And we looked at whether it would be smart economically to implement this plan under the baseline scenario. So that's where basically the climate remains the same as the past 30 years. And you can see that the plan cost of $3.8 million, which is that gray bar, is more than the total monetized risk reduction, which is the green bar, which is valued at only $14,000 to $95,000. So the cost to implement the plan, which is the gray, is much higher than how much you might save, which is that green bar. So it's probably not worth it to adapt if the climate doesn't change. But we know that's not likely. We know that based on model projections, the climate in New Mexico is bound to get much hotter and drier. So now we're going to take a look at our projected future scenario where the climate is much hotter and drier by the year 2035. So if you could animate again. Under this future scenario, you can see that the cost of the capital improvement plan, again, that 3.8 million gray bar, it's now lower than the amount you might save by adapting. So the monetized risk reduction, or your return on investment, which is that green bar, is valued now at 7.6 to 7.8 million. So it will be worth it in just a few years under our future hotter, drier climate scenario for the Pueblo of Laguna to have that water reuse program and that alternate water source plan implemented at their utility. And then there's one more animation. At the end of that assessment, the utility can download a create report, which they can then use for their decision-making, planning, and financing purposes. So if you can move on to the next slide. So again, these are those 5 potential adaptation strategies that Pueblo of Laguna evaluated in CREATE. So again, the conducting water loss audits, conducting water use audits, the drought management plan, develop alternate water supplies, and then of all the strategies, Pueblo of Laguna is most interested in moving forward with a water reuse program. And the idea is that these CREATE results will help leverage funding opportunities. And we at CREW, like Curt mentioned, are trying to make connections with those funding agents. So we bring funders into our technical assistance process from the beginning. And in the case of Pueblo of Laguna, we've since connected them with the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, RCAC, as well as the Intertribal Council of Arizona to help seek funding and additional technical assistance support for feasibility studies and designing and implementing that water reuse system at their community. So I will say one example of a recent success story. It's not tribal, but in June we learned that the CREATE exercise that we did with Trenton Waterworks out in New Jersey was actually instrumental in helping them get a huge FEMA BRIC technical assistance award that will help them get ready for implementation funding to relocate their water treatment plant, which is currently really old and located in a floodplain. So just to show how these CREATE results can be useful in moving forward with getting funding at your utility. And then if you can move on to the next slide. Curt mentioned this as well, but once we go through the technical assistance process with the utilities, we upload a case study, of course, with your blessing, to our case studies map that's on our website. And this is a great kind of peer-to-peer learning tool and networking source. So each dot on that map is a utility that's gone through our technical assistance process in the past using our risk assessment tools, so CREATE and/or the RSG. And the way it works is that you select a dot. So if you could move to the next animation. So you can see we have that Pueblo of Laguna case study uploaded onto the map, and it brings up a little blurb with some information about the utility. And then if you want to learn more, there's a little link at the bottom that you can click. So if you could animate it again, it brings up a 2-page PDF where you can learn more about their climate challenges, their planning priorities, and so on. And it also has contact information if you like to reach out to the utility itself. So that sort of wraps up our technical assistance process. Our team also provides a final 35-page report. It's not public, but we do provide it to the utilities, and it summarizes the entire process of the program, all their selections, and all their results. And again, it's to sort of help them kind of move on to the next step in their climate resilience process and to get grant funding and stuff like that. So I think that's it. I think the next page is the contact info. So I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything for us. You can let us know, but that's it from me.
using Pueblo of Laguna as our case study, I don't want you to think that you have to use all of our tools to go through an assessment process. We did that very specifically with them because we did a workshop with them where we wanted to be able to illustrate all of the tools to the audience itself. So typically a utility will either use the RSG or create and not one or the other. And then the other thing with the maps, which I would really encourage you to at least go to our website and take a look at those. They're all Esri based, so you go in, you like either type in your zip code or you can just click on the map. They're really easy to use and understand, and you'll get an idea of, from a historical weather or climate projection future, what your potential futures are going to look like. So I would just encourage you to take a look at those minimally so you can get a feel for what your potential future is going to look like. And then again, I would just offer up, if any of you are interested in technical assistance, participating in any workshops, so I don't think we're going to right now currently have one planned for out here, but if you want to work on one with us, please let me know. And that doesn't even have to be this year. It could also be in the future. You have our contact information, so please reach out to us. And we really appreciate your time. So I'll ask one last time if there are any questions. If not, oh, yeah, please. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to be clear on, if we go in and use your tools and then need assistance, we can reach out to you guys and you can help us with whatever we're doing. Oh, cool. Thank you.
So you offered to come out. I think this is, I like the prospect of this tool and being able to utilize it. At least out here in California, we don't, so a lot of our systems are really small. And so I certainly don't have 5,000 people to pay into my utility. That would be great. And maybe we'd make a little more money. But we spent this last year hauling water because we ran out of water, because we are also groundwater influenced by surface water. And so if you're going to offer, so since Edam's here in the room and he can take this back and he's with EPA, I think it would behoove us to have one of these out here working with one of the utilities out here to build that, especially a small utility, because they definitely face funding barriers and not having the number of customers to keep them in the black even. And so, and how do they, and then so then when you're facing the issue of not being able to pump water from your intake because you've reached that minimum and you don't want to depressurize your system, then you've got to find out, where do you get the water? And I don't know if anybody else, but at least in California, the state puts a lot of money together so that to pay for water hauling or to get you a water truck or things like that. But there's an issue with Department of Water Resources not accepting limited waiver of sovereign immunity. So because we're going back and forth with our attorneys on that. And that's going to hamper tribes in California if they want it for a funding source. So if that's the only funding source that gets thrown at us by EPA, it's not going to go very far. So I would, and I think you're going to get some of that if you bring a training to California. I think maybe if you could carry that forward, that our water program or drinking water program set that up. That would be my suggestion, my request.
Just a couple of things to respond to that. The tribe that we worked with, Pueblo of Laguna, it's a smaller system, but we've worked with systems that are 100, 200 people. So our tools are applicable across the board. We also worked with even smaller than that. Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we can do it. And one of the things that I would just kind of mention here is, if there's a group of smaller utilities, there's an opportunity to do like a larger training, whether that's a workshop or a technical assistance exercise. So I'll come see you after when we're done here, and we can talk a bit more about it.
And if you could invite us, the other tribes in the area, to come and see it, that way it becomes more of like a hands-on, and not just her tribe is benefiting from it, because in my public water utility, I have 45 connections. So, but I mean, and we have well homes, but it's like, that's, it's the same thing. It's very small community. And, to be able to see something like this would be very helpful to see if it would even work where I'm at, you know?
That's the idea. So what we do in a lot of cases, when I say a regional exercise where we work with 2 or 3 utilities, we then put on a workshop after that, and we open it up to a much larger geographic area so that utilities can learn from your experience, but then also see what we've done. So you don't
Yeah,
have to go
that's,
through the detailed process, but you get a lot out of that workshop.
that's what we like to do. We try to do it regionally. We ask for things regionally. So in California, if you just, we'd probably ask for more than one training, because going from Northern California all the way down to Southern, or getting to Central, it can be, it's a burden. Yeah, thank you. A burden. That's what I was looking
Mhm.
for. And even having something out with some of the Arizona communities and Nevada. Huh? Oh, I thought somebody was talking. Sorry. So I think just planning ahead, that those would be, well, you guys know how we request stuff. So we might not be spread out in some areas, and we do have a lot of people that are close together, but travel is, and funding is an issue for travel. So the more that we can make it regionally, that benefits, where tribes can come and travel to it. Like she said, 45 connections. We have 18. We got some small utilities.
Thank you.
I will also add that, it doesn't have to just be restricted to utility operators. We can bring in, like, if you have partners with the state or other like funding partners. For instance, for a lot of the tribes that we've worked with, we bring an Indian Health Service into the conversation. So I know there's some really good connections between the tribes and that organization, as well as at least in New Mexico is the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. So I know sometimes the EFCs can be a good partner too. So we bring them into not only the technical assistance exercise, but also into the workshops and the broader trainings. And we like to do like a panel discussion with the funders. So bring in a whole bunch of, like, it could be FEMA, USDA, IHS, the EFCs and EPA and all those organizations, so that we can have a broader conversation about how you go about getting funding for your system, either individually or as a group of systems.
Just one other quick thing on the funding, because Audrey made me think about this. There are the standing environmental finance centers, but I had mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law earlier. There's actually a tremendous amount of money that stood up, I believe, 26 more environmental finance centers across the U.S. that have a tremendous amount of funds to actually provide technical assistance to walk through grant and loan application processes. So those are the types of people that we bring into the process so that they can help you access those funds, hopefully grants or debt forgiveness loans, so that you can do the work that's identified as a result of these processes.
And we also have a question online from Suzanne Marr. She says, great presentation. So how much staff time does it take, since many staff are super busy but could benefit from working with you?
Sure. So typically the process, it's spread out over around like 2 to 4 months, but the total time working with us is about 35 to 40 hours. So we hold working sessions virtually that are up to like 2 hours. So there's usually maybe 4 or 5 of those working sessions over the course of 3-4 months. And then there's also usually a potential for an on-site visit where we can come out to you, and that would reduce the amount of online sessions. But yeah, if you'd be interested in an on-site visit, we can most likely, depending on funds, come out to you guys as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.